About 3 winters ago, I took a solo trip to my parents' cabin in northern Pennsylvania a few days before Christmas. My younger brother was supposed to meet me there the next morning, so I planned to arrive first, get the fireplace going, and stock the fridge before he showed up. Winter driving had never really bothered me. I'd grown up around snow and I thought I knew how to prepare for it. A full tank of gas, warm clothes in the back seat, and a weather app, that was usually enough. Looking back, I realize I wasn't prepared for the people winter can hide. Snow doesn't just cover roads, sometimes it covers intentions. I didn't understand that until the night I stopped at the last gas station before the storm. By the time I realized the station wasn't abandoned, someone had already walked behind my truck. The road had been almost empty for the last hour. Thick clouds swallowed what little daylight remained, and heavy snow drifted across the windshield in waves. The forecast had warned of a blizzard arriving after dark, but it seemed to be moving much faster than expected. Then my fuel light came on. I checked the GPS. 1 gas station remained before the highway climbed into the mountains. After that, there was nothing for nearly 60 miles. When I finally saw the station, it looked like it had been forgotten years ago. The sign was faded. Half the letters were missing. The pumps were dark. Even the parking lot lights were dead. I almost kept driving, but I couldn't risk running out of fuel once the storm reached full strength. As I pulled in, my headlights swept across the building. Something caught my attention. Immediately, fresh tire tracks only. 1 vehicle had entered recently, but there wasn't a single vehicle parked out front. I told myself whoever had stopped there must have parked behind the building to work on something. That explanation made enough sense. I filled my tank using the card reader, surprised that it still worked despite the station looking abandoned. The receipt printer buzzed weakly before spitting out a wrinkled slip of paper. Inside, the convenience store was strangely warm, not comfortable, just occupied. The shelves were half empty but not dusty. A pot of coffee sat behind the counter, still warm enough to send faint steam into the air. No cashier, no customers. Hello? I called. Nothing. I waited a few seconds before stepping farther inside. Behind the register sat an open notebook with today's date written across the top. Someone had been there. Recently. Very recently. Then I heard a metal door close, somewhere in the back. Not loudly, carefully. I smiled to myself. Finally, an employee. I waited. No one came out. Instead, I heard slow footsteps. 1, 2, 3, then silence. The footsteps hadn't been approaching. They'd stopped. Like whoever made them wanted me to wonder where they had gone. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. Decided to leave. As I reached the entrance, I froze. The front door was slightly open. I knew I'd pulled it shut behind me. Cold wind drifted through the gap. Outside, my truck was exactly where I'd left it, but someone had walked around it. Fresh boot prints circled the driver's side before stopping near the tailgate. They didn't continue anywhere. Whoever made them had simply stood there watching. I stepped back inside without thinking. Maybe another traveler had arrived. Maybe they were looking for help. That explanation disappeared the moment I noticed something else. The tire tracks I'd seen earlier no longer looked like they belonged to 1 vehicle. There were 2. One had arrived, the other had quietly pulled in while I was inside. Neither vehicle was visible from the front. I moved toward the side window and carefully looked. Around the corner of the building, an old pickup sat hidden beside the service garage with its headlights off. 3 men stood near it. One pointed toward my truck, another glanced at the store. None of them looked like mechanics. None of them looked stranded. I ducked away before they could notice me. My phone showed 1 weak bar of service. Tried calling my brother. The call failed instantly. Outside, one of the truck doors slammed shut. Another voice drifted through the
wind. He's still inside.
Stopped breathing. They weren't talking about an employee. They were talking about me. I searched desperately for another exit and found a narrow hallway leading to a storage room. At the far end was a back door secured with a sliding chain. I eased it loose as quietly as I could. The chain scraped against the metal, too loud. Almost immediately, voices outside stopped. Then someone shouted, "Back door!" I threw the door open and ran. Snow reached halfway up my boots, making every step feel like dragging concrete. Blocks behind me came the sound of people crashing through the doorway. I couldn't outrun 3 men in deep snow. Then I remembered something I'd noticed while pulling into the station. A narrow maintenance road disappeared into the trees. Behind the property, I angled toward it, fighting through the snow until my boots finally hit packed ground. The road curved around the back of the hill. For nearly 5 minutes, I saw nothing except white trees and blowing snow. Then the highway appeared below me. So did my truck. The men were still searching around the station, expecting me to run toward the woods instead of circling back, keeping low behind the snowbank. I reached the truck without making a sound. Instead of starting it immediately, I released the parking brake and let it roll downhill first. Only after putting some distance between us did I turn the engine over. In my mirror, the gas station disappeared behind the storm. No headlights followed. Maybe they couldn't find me, or maybe they didn't want to leave the station. The next morning, after I reached the cabin safely, I emptied my pockets onto the kitchen table. That's when I noticed something folded behind my gas receipt. It wasn't mine. It was another receipt from the same station, printed just 6 minutes before I arrived. At the bottom, someone had written in blue ink, "Wait for the next one." I still keep that receipt locked inside a drawer at home, not because of what it says, but because I still don't know whether it was meant for me, or whether I arrived just after someone else never made it.
5 winters ago, during a weekend trip that my wife and I almost canceled because of the weather, we had rented a small cabin deep in the Adirondacks to celebrate our anniversary. The forecast called for moderate snowfall, nothing unusual for January, so we decided to go anyway. Looking back, the storm itself wasn't what frightened me. Blizzards come and go. Roads reopen. Snow melts. What stays with me is the feeling of realizing someone had been sharing the same isolated place with us long before we ever arrived. Even now, whenever a storm is forecast, I find myself wondering who else might be waiting for everyone else to disappear. By the second night, we weren't worried about the snow anymore. We were trying to figure out who was inside the property with us. The cabin sat at the end of a narrow forest road, nearly 15 miles from the nearest town. The owner lived out of state and rented it through a vacation website. Check-in was simple. A lockbox held the key, and we didn't see another person all afternoon. The first evening was exactly what we'd hoped for. Snow fell quietly outside while we cooked dinner, played cards, and watched the fireplace crackle. Around midnight, the wind became violent. By morning, the blizzard had completely buried our SUV. The road had disappeared beneath several feet of snow. Neither of us panicked. We had enough food for 3 or 4 days, firewood stacked under the porch, and backup batteries for our phones. The power stayed on. Everything felt manageable. Until lunchtime. I opened the front door to clear snow away from the entrance. That's when I noticed footprints. Fresh ones. They circled the cabin. At first, I assumed they were mine from the previous evening. Then I realized something impossible. Snow had fallen all night. Every track from yesterday had vanished. These had been made recently. Someone had walked around the cabin after sunrise. I followed them with my eyes. They disappeared behind the woodshed. When I walked around to check, nothing. No person. No vehicle. No additional tracks leading away. It looked as though whoever made them had simply stopped existing. I told myself drifting snow had covered the rest. That explanation was enough to calm both of us. For a while. Later that afternoon, my wife asked why I'd moved one of the porch chairs. I hadn't. She pointed toward the window. The chair that had been beside the door was now facing the living room window. Neither of us remembered touching it. Maybe the wind had pushed it. except it was heavy, made of solid wood, and the porch was enclosed on 3 sides. That night, we locked every door before going to bed. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to a faint scraping sound. Not knocking, not footsteps, something dragging slowly across the porch. It stopped outside our bedroom window. Then, silence. I waited nearly 5 minutes before looking. The porch was empty. The chair had moved again. Now it sat directly beneath the bedroom window, facing the glass. The next morning, the storm finally eased enough for us to see farther into the trees. While carrying more firewood inside, I noticed thin smoke rising less than 100 yards away. Not from another cabin, from inside the forest. Someone had a fire. That made no sense. The property map showed nothing nearby for miles. I considered walking over to investigate. Instead, I grabbed the binoculars we had packed for hiking. Through the trees, I spotted a small tarp stretched between branches. Then movement. Someone stepped briefly into view before disappearing again. They were living there, watching the cabin. I didn't tell my wife immediately. I didn't want to scare her until I understood what I was looking at. Then something happened that removed every doubt. When we went to make lunch, 2 cans of soup were missing from the kitchen shelf. I thought we'd already used them. My wife insisted we hadn't. We checked the rest of the supplies. Several snack bars were gone too. Nothing else had been disturbed. No broken window. No forced door. Just less food than we'd brought. That's when I remembered something. The cabin owner had mentioned an unfinished storage basement during check-in instructions. He'd said guests didn't need to use it. I found the basement door behind a coat rack. It wasn't locked. The stairs creaked as I walked down with a flashlight. The air smelled damp. Near the back wall, I found muddy footprints. Fresh. Beside them sat empty food wrappers. Not ours. Someone had been sleeping there. The flashlight beam landed on a pile of old blankets tucked behind the furnace. Still warm. Whoever had been there had left only moments earlier. I didn't stay another second. I ran upstairs, locked the basement door with a heavy tool chest, and quietly told my wife to pack only what we absolutely needed. The road was still buried, but waiting until night felt even more dangerous. We dug the SUV free for nearly 2 hours. Just as we finished, I glanced toward the tree line. A man stood between the pines, watching. He didn't wave. He didn't move. He simply stood there until the engine started. Then he slowly stepped back into the woods. We spent almost 40 minutes forcing the SUV through the snow until we finally reached a county road where plows had already passed. Neither of us spoke the entire drive home. A week later, the cabin owner called to apologize. He'd gone to inspect the property after we left. The basement was empty. No blankets, no wrappers, no footprints. Only one thing remained. On the basement shelf sat a small camping stove that didn't belong to him. Its fuel canister was still warm. Even now, whenever heavy snow traps people inside for days, I don't just think about the storm. I think about how easy it would be for someone to wait nearby, knowing that eventually everyone stops looking out the windows.
This happened a little over 4 years ago, during one of the worst winters I can remember. My cousin and I had rented a small cabin in the mountains of western New York for a long weekend. We wanted to unplug for a few days, hike the trails if the weather allowed, and enjoy the snow before heading back to work. Locals always say winter changes once the sun goes down. Roads become unfamiliar, landmarks disappear, and distances feel much longer than they actually are. I used to think that was just something people said to make the mountains sound more dangerous than they really were. Then I met a snowplow driver who refused to drive one particular road after dark. At first I thought he was joking. By the end of that night I understood why. The snowplow's amber lights disappeared into the storm. Then I realized I was the only vehicle left on the road. Earlier that afternoon, my cousin had slipped while carrying firewood and twisted his ankle badly enough that we decided he should stay at the cabin. The nearest pharmacy was almost 40 minutes away, so I volunteered to make the drive before the storm got any worse. By the time I finished buying pain medication and groceries, snow was already falling twice as hard as it had been when I arrived. The cashier glanced toward the windows. "You heading back up the mountain?" I nodded. She hesitated before handing me my receipt. "Don't wait too long." That was all she said. 10 minutes later, I found myself following a county snowplow climbing the same road toward the mountains. The driver was clearing nearly a foot of fresh snow, and I stayed behind him, figuring it was much safer than driving alone. After several miles, the plow slowed and pulled onto the shoulder. I rolled down my window. The driver leaned out. "Cabin up north?" "Yeah," he pointed. "Farther up the highway. I stop at Miller's." "Fork?" "Okay." Then his expression changed. "If you see someone waving you down after that..." He paused. "Keep driving." I laughed awkwardly. "What, bears?" He didn't laugh. "I don't go past that turn after dark." Before I could ask why, he raised his window and continued driving. At Miller's Fork, the snowplow turned into a maintenance yard. I continued alone. For the next 15 minutes, I saw nothing except falling snow. No houses, no headlights, no other cars. Road narrowed as it climbed higher into the forest. Then I noticed someone standing ahead, a man. Heavy winter, coat reflective safety vest, stood beside a pickup parked crooked on the shoulder. Its hazard lights blinked weakly through the snow. He lifted one, arm slowly as if asking for help. I eased off the accelerator. Maybe he'd broken down. Maybe this was exactly the kind of person the snowplow driver expected me to ignore. That didn't seem right as I got closer. I noticed something strange as the truck's hood wasn't open. No tire tracks led away from. Its snow had already settled evenly across the windshield. It hadn't broken down recently. It had been sitting there for hours. The man lowered his arm. He didn't step toward the road. He just watched my truck approach. Then, I saw his boots. They were completely clean, not packed with snow, not even wet. Without thinking, I pressed the accelerator. I drove past him. He never turned to watch me leave. About 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A weather alert. Mountain road closed ahead. I frowned. That couldn't be right. There hadn't been any roadblocks. No warning signs. Just that man. A mile later, my headlights caught something across the road. A large pine tree had collapsed under the weight of the snow. Blocking both lanes, I stopped. There was no way around it. I shifted into reverse. Then, my backup camera flickered. Someone was standing behind my truck, too close to see clearly. Through the snow, I looked over my shoulder. Nothing. When I checked the screen, again, the figure was gone. I reversed anyway. Slowly, after about 50 yards, I noticed fresh footprints running alongside the driver's side of my truck. They hadn't been there before. Whoever made them was keeping pace with me, hidden just beyond the edge of my headlights. Then came the first thud. Something heavy struck the bed of my truck. Another hit followed seconds later. Packed snow, maybe someone was throwing them from the trees, trying to make me stop. I slammed the truck into drive and headed downhill as fast as the icy road allowed. The impact stopped, but when I looked in the mirror, headlights appeared. No, not headlights, flashlights, 3 of them, moving through the trees, keeping up with the road. Gripped the steering wheel tighter. They weren't chasing me with a vehicle. They already knew where the road went. Around the next bend, amber lights suddenly flashed through the storm. The snowplow. It was parked sideways across the highway. The driver climbed out before I even stopped. "You didn't stop for him?" It wasn't a question. I shook my head. He looked relieved. Without another word, he climbed back into the cab, lowered the blade, and motioned for me to stay directly behind him. For the next 20 minutes, I followed so closely that snow thrown from the plow completely hid the road ahead. I couldn't see anything beyond those flashing amber lights, but I also couldn't see the flashlights anymore. When we finally reached the main highway, the driver pulled over. He walked to my passenger side and looked at 3 deep dents along the truck bed. I hadn't noticed them before. They got close. I stared at the damage. "What was that back there?" He looked toward the mountain road before answering. "People." Who knows storms keep witnesses away, that was all he said. He climbed back into the snowplow and drove off before I could ask another question. When I reached the cabin, my cousin asked why I looked so pale. I told him everything. The next morning, we drove back down the mountain together. The pickup truck was gone. The fallen tree had been cut into pieces and pushed off the road. It looked like nothing had happened, except for one thing. Half buried in the fresh snow near where the tree had blocked the road was a bright orange road flare. It had never been lit. Someone had placed it there, just far enough away that no driver would ever reach it before stopping.